Hi, everyone. Thanks ever so much for having me here. My name is Asha Pillai. I work with a global organization, a Fortune 500 organization. I have been a finance leader across the India businesses, and now I lead a finance reporting and analysis organization for the Global Capability Center, or GCC, of that organization. I am here today more as an associate with Let's Walk Together. Vijay and I have been associated for about, I think, 4 years now. And I've been amazed at the sort of work Vijay has been doing as a community leader for all of us with bipolar disorder. I think there are about 600 people in that, and Let's Work Together initiative in particular is about helping folk with severe mental illnesses get roles in organizations. And this is essentially a deck or information sharing for corporates who are interested and keen to one, recruit and develop talent of people with severe mental illnesses. I just want to say that I am also a case study. I've had bipolar disorder. I know the illnesses is on a spectrum, but I've been a high functioning individual with bipolar disorder, and have sort of climbed the ranks in the corporate world. I can also say my father was also somebody with bipolar disorder, and he also was very high functioning. So there are quite a few of us in the community who are high functioning, and therefore, needs to be included in the talent spectrum of corporates. So, in the next 20 minutes or so, we'll just go through how we can recruit and retain people with severe mental illnesses. There is definitely this untapped workforce advantage in corporate India, simply because people with mental health issues also come with a lot of strengths. And I just want to share with bipolar disorder, we do go through mania and depression. And when we do go through mania, we can be hyper productive and more productive than the average workforce. So therefore, you will see productivity efficiencies if you were to hire people from with bipolar disorder or any other severe mental illness. Before we move into what to do, what the policy should look like, this is a deeply personal story, so I just want us to go through this, right? So there is Ravi, who's a young analyst, excels for months, consistently delivers quality work, earns praise from his team, but he has a manic episode and he disappears for weeks without explanation. His manager hesitates, unsure of how to respond. How do I help? What can I ask? Where are the boundaries? Do we even know what a manic episode is? HR remains silent. The system wasn't designed for situations like this. No policy guides the conversation, no training prepared anyone for this moment. Ravi eventually returns, but the silence continues, leaving both employee and employer uncertain about the path forward. How many Ravis do you think exist quietly in our teams today? We are not really well equipped to deal with the Ravis. We don't know, as line managers, as team leaders, as community managers, how to deal with something that has been such a taboo over generations of people who've been employed. So hopefully this deck will help us address that. But before we go to how we do what we can do, let's think about a little bit about the numbers as well, right? Because if you think it's a very unique case, a rare case, then maybe you don't want to spend organizational time and energy and invest resources on this particular problem statement. But in fact, corporates really are sort of uh, you know being there's a cost to the silence, and that's the reason why this matters and what we need to do about the support that we need to extend. So 1 in 7 Indians live with mental disorders. I think I read somewhere in 2020 that there were about 7 million Indians with bipolar disorder. And I would imagine a lot of us are working in the corporate environment. So this is exclusively bipolar disorder data. So imagine that you have other severe mental illnesses as well, right? So people with bipolar disability um, tend to sort of report inadequate workplace support. And then there's about a lakh crore annual productivity loss in India from untreated mental health conditions. It could be on account of, sort of retention costs, recruitment costs, training costs, development costs. All of it can add up, and then there is a productivity number that's been stated here. uh, there is, when employees receive proper accommodation, apparently the retention rates for such individuals is much higher. It's 25% or so. So there is definitely, sort of data that is compelling enough to tell us the problem is big enough for us to wake up to it in the first place, recognize it, and do something about it. Right. So let's move on to understanding what severe mental illnesses look like. And it's not stress or burnout. I think we've done a really good job. India leads the Global Capability Center market. We've got about 60% of global organizations having capability centers in India. So we lead it. Therefore, I think culturally we've evolved quite a bit, and now we understand mental well-being, mental health are all very important things that corporates do tend to look at, and provide appropriate support. But severe mental illnesses goes much, much beyond that, right? So it's people with true mental illnesses that are diagnosed that we're talking about, and they need very different support than generic workplace stress and burnout. So we kind of talk about mental illnesses in three categories, just to make it simpler. So there are mood disorders. So there's bipolar disorder, severe depression. Those come under the spectrum of mood disorders. Workplace needs include routine. Somebody needs to have a good sleep stability, low trigger environment. So when you think about mood disorders and when you think about sleep, you're also thinking about, okay, if this person is in a night shift, what does that do to him or her, right? So that's something to think about. Psychotic disorders are normally schizophrenia and schizoaffective, but I can tell you, as a bipolar patient, I've had psychotic episodes myself. So when you think about bipolar disorder, you have mania, you go into a very high functioning mode. Sometimes that can lead to irritability, etc., and then you go into severe depression as well. So it's kind of mixed mood disorder, but it can also have psychotic implications. So these are episodic in nature, and what tends to happen is the individual tends to lose, the sense of reality, and therefore people around that individual cannot really understand what the individual is trying to say or do. And this is a very critical matter to sort of which would need hospitalization and medication and immediate intervention. So that's essentially psychotic disorders. But think of psychotic disorders not from the point of an illness, but from the fact that it's episodic. The individual loses sense with reality, and therefore we need intervention. Vis-a-vis a mood disorder, which has its ups and downs, and we need a little bit of a different routine and structure, and a psychologically safe space. Then there are chronic psychiatric conditions. So there's severe OCD, there's post-traumatic stress disorder. There are some personality disorders like borderline personality disorders. And these have to be addressed. So there needs to be flexibility, there needs to be consistency in terms of support, there needs to be empathetic communication. So it's a wide spectrum of illnesses that we are talking about here, all clubbed under severe mental illnesses, and each needing specific interventions and treatments. So there's one thing to sort of call out here. So with appropriate treatment, accommodation, and support, individuals with SMI can achieve stability and excel professionally. So these conditions are covered under the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016, where the disability is greater than 40% or so. So this is also covered under the law as well, right? Now, again, going back to the Indian landscape, right? So what's the Indian landscape saying on this? India continues to face a significant mental health challenge. Lifetime prevalence of mental disorders is about 13.7%. Corporate places with any policy on mental health is about only 10%. So that means there are 9 out of 10 corporate organizations that's not even addressing it. A lot of people don't want to disclose this. So this becomes even more difficult for workplaces where people, for various reasons, taboo, stigma, don't want to disclose. And then it becomes a lot more difficult for corporates to do anything about it. So just to sort of understand where we are in the Indian landscape. So, from a workplace culture, there's a silent struggle, there are unprepared managers, there's a generational shift with Gen Z. So, the silent struggle is really, let's not talk about it, right? Let's just brush it under the carpet. There's also this invisibility of the illness that we talk about a lot. Even a person like me who has bipolar disorder, sometimes I'm not even able to recognize I have bipolar disorder, right? We have to be extremely self aware. So it becomes even more difficult for somebody else to recognize when I'm sort of going through a difficult time. Unprepared managers, I mean, managers cannot be expected to be therapists and coaches. They're trying to deliver what the organization is asking them to deliver, and they are told to sort of extend basic care. But this becomes a lot more difficult for a manager who's dealing with an employee with a severe mental illness. There's also generational shift, but I think that's towards the good. Gen Z is a lot more into mental health. They are much more tuned in. They are open about their struggles, etc. So that may not be overall a bad thing, but imagine that in a multi-generational workplace environment. So that creates its own sort of friction. Now, how do we reframe? The first things first, right? We've got to reframe mental health. So, what are the myths? So, one is people with SMI are unstable and unreliable employees. I think there's a very important distinction between somebody who's been constantly unstable and constantly unreliable to treating it as episodic. So, severe mental illness is episodic, which means that it happens in episodes, which may be anywhere between 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on how bad the illness is. Um, the It's not permanent, and between episodes individuals can function at full capacity with proper management. So when we call ourselves high functioning, it's not as if we don't have these episodes. It's just that we are able to bounce back from an episode a little bit more quickly. So that's one thing to bear in mind, and understanding this employee's episodic nature of illness is very important. Now, hiring people with SMI is risky for the organization. Actually, proper support systems will lower the risk, but remember the 1 in 7 statistic. Even if you think you're not hiring somebody with an SMI, they may have SMI, because 1 in 7 of your employees might be, dealing with a severe mental illness. So it is an imperative, right? Then the psychiatric medication dulls performance and creativity. This is a problem, not so much as much for people with mental illnesses as well, right? We ourselves, when we take drugs, we feel that we are sort of sleepy, we're sedated, etc. But this is a conversation to be had with the doctor to iterate. So medication enables focus, consistency, and allows individuals to perform at their best, and medication is absolutely crucial. So when you think about an employee who is having an illness and who is not on drugs, that is sort of a red flag. But if there's an employee who is saying they are ill and they are on drugs, that's probably a green flag. So that's something to bear in mind. People with SMI cannot hold leadership roles, which is not true. I think I just wanted to share my own story, my father's story. There are multiple stories in the 600 member community that Vijay has. Vijay himself is high functioning and doing extremely well for himself. So they can really succeed, provided they're given the right frameworks and support. So now, what makes SMI different, and what distinct needs do SMIs need? Okay, so now we know what an SMI is, what are the severe mental illnesses, we know what the myths are, what sort of support people need, but what do corporates do? What do we need to do? So the episodic nature of the illness means that symptoms may intensify periodically, requiring recovery breaks or modified workload. And understanding this pattern is essential. So in a year, I can have two manic episodes or hypomanic episodes, and I can have two depressive stints. And then it's up to me to either say, tell the employer that, look, I'm going through this, or I also look at my workload and see how I can sort of manage this ups and downs vis-a-vis how my workload is. So net on an average, my productivity would be very similar to any other employee's productivity or my peers' productivity. But episodically, there'll be times when I'm more productive and there'll be times when I'm less. But the more important thing to keep in mind is if there is actually a crash or a psychotic episode, then the employee would need leave, sick leave. Employee may choose not to say why, but we just need to provide that flexibility of providing medical leave with proper sort of documentation, etc. Also, if the employee says they can work, trust them and provide them a more balanced workload. So have those conversations on what's the workload like and is this manageable, and maybe an agile daily meet will also help during that process if the employee is not taking a break. Do think about medical considerations. So, like we said, side effects can include fatigue, cognitive changes, sleep disruption. So side effects can include fatigue, cognitive changes, or sleep disruption. Flexibility in work hours may be necessary. So what do we mean by that, right? So we mean that especially in global capability centers that work on shift timings, ITITS services work on shift timings. We really do need to consider what are the right shifts for these employees. For example, my personal case, because of my medication, sometimes I'm not able to wake up until 10. So I am sort of handshaked that I will start my work at say 10:30, but I will then go on to work until 8:30 or 9:30 as is necessary. So this is something that we need to sort of have an early conversation on. And sometimes these cycles also tend to change. So when I'm manic, I'm able to stay up a little bit later, but that means I wake up a little bit later at 12. When I'm depressed, it's the other way around. I need to go to bed really early. So sometimes it can change, and therefore open communication it becomes very important. Sleep sensitivity is very, very high. So any sleep disruption can trigger episodes. So really important for this sleep piece to be taken care of. And there has to be trust-based management. So the disclosure dilemma is truly real. Employees need to feel psychologically safe to share their needs without fear or discrimination. We're not asking the employees to share it widely, but at least if it is shared with the manager can come from a place of wanting to truly help this employee. So, what does the legal policy framework say? There are four things to bear in mind. One, there is the Rights of Persons with Disability Act. This covers mental illness when disability is 40% or more, and there is legal protection against discrimination. There is reasonable accommodation. This is not optional, it's a legal duty. Confidentiality agreements. Medical information must be kept strictly confident and is strictly in confidence. And there is a non-discrimination mandate. So there is a non-discriminating mandate, which means that hiring, promotion, termination decisions cannot be cannot be based on mental health status. This is a little bit more difficult, right? So there would be unconscious biases, microaggressions that can creep in. It's very, very hard. And I also work in the women community space, and we see a systemic unconscious biases creep in that space. So, it's all the more likely to be here because we're all coming from the same socio-cultural fabric where mental health and mental illness was taboo. So then all the more reason to look at data skews like in gender to see if persons with mental health where the data is available, are they being promoted, and is their performance being managed in line with the rest of the organization. Right. So now, how do we design an inclusive recruitment that sort of screens for this? So, four things to think about: bias-free language, flexible interview, recruiter training, and disclosure policy. This is really, really hard, but something to bear in mind. Bias-free language. Job descriptions should not inadvertently exclude candidates with mental health conditions. So I can give you a very funny example. We had a job description that said we're looking for a gladiator, and that automatically excluded quite a few women, right? So similarly, we need to sort of really check for biases, and AI can truly help with that. We need a flexible interview mode. So can it be virtual? Can it be a phone in? Should it be an in-person? At what point should it be an in-person? How do we accommodate for different comfort levels? This is so much more harder to do when you're trying to filter out candidates. But if at all, we can be at least cognizant of it, we would then, have a bias-free interview. Recruiter training is very important in all of this, right? Sensitivity training on disability disclosure, accommodation. Sometimes recruiters can be quite nosy, and again, I again have a lot of data where recruiters ask, "Oh, are you married? Are you going to be pregnant soon? Are you planning a family soon?" So this is in terms of women. So imagine the sort of questions that could come if that person chooses to say he or she has mental health issues. Have you been hospitalized? There could be many number of questions, and therefore recruitment training is very, very important to not breach some of this sensitivity parameters. Then the disclosure policy, so that is clear, right? So only voluntary disclosure guidelines, which means that the candidate can, if he or she chooses to, protect their privacy and outline accommodation processes. So they may disclose, they may not disclose. If they disclose, we've got to be very careful with how we deal with that disclosure, and then provide reasonable accommodations depending on what the candidate asks for. Now, language shapes inclusion, right? So this we know to be true across the board. So thrives under pressure and tight deadlines, could be excels in structured environments with clear priorities. High energy self-starter who works independently. So this is all job description that I'm talking about. Collaborates effectively across teams with minimal supervision. Must be comfortable with ambiguity and rapid change versus adapts well to planned changes with appropriate notice. Requires exceptional multitasking abilities. Could be managing multiple projects with strong organizational skills. Dynamic environment with unpredictable needs. Could be works in a supportive environment with clear process. This signals to the candidate that the workplace is truly inclusive, and by this would also mean that there's not a lot of ad hocism, not a lot of needless workplace demands to stretch beyond work hours and things like that. Now, inclusion from day zero, there's a recruitment checklist. So now imagine the candidate has come in. Before that, sorry, we need to sort of think about job description bias audit. So we just talked about it. AI can help you with that. Interviewer scripts so that, we are not needlessly nosy. Candidate scheduling flexibility. So if the candidate is asking for flexibility, acknowledge it, be kind about it, be empathetic about it. There are a lot of times when candidates asking for flexibility have then not been looked at. And that's fair because you have so many candidates to screen from, but this is something to be mindful of. Pre-offer manager briefing. This is really important. Brief hiring managers on reasonable accommodation, confidentiality requirements, and support resources before candidate start date. This is really, really important because then the candidate feels a lot more safer in that environment. There needs a buddy system activation and accommodation conversation. What is the best way to do a buddy system activation? Have a buddy with another buddy with severe mental illness. So if I was somebody newly coming in as a bipolar with bipolar disorder, I would be very grateful with somebody else who also has bipolar disorder who can help me navigate the system. Now, we recognize this is on a spectrum, but this would be a huge way to sort of, embed inclusivity. One person can create change with, 2 to 4 and so on. Accommodation conversations, proactively discuss accommodation needs during onboarding in a private confidential setting, either with HR or line manager, depending on the employee's needs. This is where sensitive training comes in. Even if the employee does not want to reveal the full extent of the disease, we can still have an accommodation conversation. So how does a support system look? There's a pyramid. So there's essentially starts with predictable routines, consistent schedules, clear communication patterns. We need to be very clear from the get-go on what we are expecting. If there is change in the priority, then we need to drop something else to be able to add something else. This is true for everybody, but more so true for people with severe mental illnesses. Hybrid flexibility, remote work options today are much more easier to do. Organizations, as we come back to the office, we need to sort of think about this as well. Allow people to have mental health days. I think Gen Z is already sort of systematically introducing it, and it's a great thing to do. Mentorship and buddy programs, like we said, mentorship with another senior leader who has an illness, like this. So even with women, you have women mentors, women buddies make a huge difference. Likewise, if we were to create the same sort of scaffolding for severe people with severe mental illnesses, they feel a lot more seen, because there are people like them who are thriving in the organization. And then career development, right? That's the most important thing. I mean, everybody needs that career development, and they should never feel like they're being um, you know uh, uh, there's bias simply because they have severe mental illness, and being discriminated against. So that's something to bear in mind. All right, so managers are not expected to be therapists, but at the same time, how do managers respond? So they need to recognize, they need to respond, they need to refer to the right professional resources. Recognizing is, even if the person has not revealed a severe mental illness, if there are sudden changes in work quality or productivity, if there is increased absenteeism, if there is a withdrawal from team interactions, if there's unusual behaviors, if there's distress, you just have to notice and start documenting what you're noticing as well. Right? So, recognizing before reacting is very, very important. But we need to recognize to be able to respond. And we responding is more about coming from a place of curiosity, right? Instead of going and saying, a lot of corporates talk about the seed big model of feedback, where you say behavior, impact, and consequence. But the problem with that behavior, impact, consequence framework is it does not give the employee enough psychological safety to tell the manager or whoever the stakeholder is the context of what is going on. So curiosity, I'm seeing this, what's happening? That conversation needs to be happen needs to happen, and needs to happen in private. So choose a private confidential setting. Express concern. I've noticed you seem stressed. How can I support you? Listen without judgment. Ask what accommodations might help. Reassure about job security. So, listening without judgment, what can I do for you? What would help in the moment? Do you need a sick leave? Do you need a sabbatical? Do you need flexible working? Do you want to work 4 hours instead of 8 hours? Do you want a different shift? Do you want to work from office? These are all available as far as HR policy is concerned. You just need to be able to apply it in the context of that employee, and then reassure about job security. It's okay, you can still come back. You take a couple of weeks and you can come back. Sometimes, if the leaves is already busted, then ask for medical, reports, etc., so that you can sort of do that as sick leave, put that in the system as sick leave. I'm also conscious that as managers, we want our work delivered. So sometimes it's important to have that conversation with the manager's manager, saying, I am going to give this person accommodation. That means that my delivery is being impacted. I may need somebody else to step in, and have that as well, so that there is somebody stepping in if the sabbatical is, say, 3 months or 6 months duration. Then you have to refer. You cannot be the therapist. You have to refer the employee to professional resources. Employee assistant programs already exist in corporate. So that's, if the employee is not talking to anyone, at least refer them to the EAP. But ideally, they should be seeing a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and then a psychologist, because in serious mental illnesses, it's not a psychologist. A psychiatrist can prescribe medication, and therefore the employee needs to see the psychiatrist. So don't show the EAP as the end all and be all solution. Provide information about available resources, including doctors. Respect confidentiality throughout. Document your accommodation requests and follow up regularly without being intrusive. Check in. How are you doing? Are you okay? Even if that person is on leave, send a WhatsApp saying, is everything okay? Do you need any help, etc. So recognize if there's a problem, respond with empathy, and refer to professional resources. What are the manager do's and don'ts? Ask supportively, offer flexibility, document accommodations, maintain confidentiality, check in regularly, and focus on performance. You don't want to be requesting medical details unless it's needed only from a sick leave and extending the sick leave policy as per the company policies. You don't want to be making assumptions. There might be somebody who's just stressed and does not have any illness. You don't want to gossip or label. You have to treat this with utmost respect. So you shouldn't be talking about it to anybody else other than maybe your manager and your HR. You don't want to force disclosure because the employee has a right to privacy. You don't want to lower performance standards either. This is an important one. People think that it's okay to lower performance standards. It's all about handshakes, and in the handshake it's about understanding what the employee can perform, what the delivery is, create clear deliverables with target dates, and then sort of review how that deliverable is going. And if it's not going well, then you do need to have those conversations, because while episodically if the person is sick it's okay, but as a continuum you need to be performance managing this employee so that the employee can even sort of be rated high if they are delivering, and also be promoted. So it's also in the employee's best interest as well. And then you don't want to be acting as a therapist. I think I've said this too many times already, but you are not the employee's therapist. So culture cascades, one is leadership openness, measure and improve, embed in policy, recognize inclusive managers, amplify lived experience, and invest in training. So leaders need to be open about their own mental health journeys. I'm very open about my own disorder. Measure and improve, track inclusion metrics. So like we do with DEI, like we do with women, I think we need to sort of extend that data for people with severe mental illnesses and disabilities as well. We need to embed this into policy. It's not just about mental well-being, it's about how do you deal with persons with severe mental illnesses, what reasonable accommodations look like. They don't need to be different. They are flexible policies that you already have, but you just need to be able to embed it and call it out. Recognize inclusive managers, because we need to celebrate managers who are providing these psychologically safe environments for their teams. You need to amplify lived experience. So like I said, the mentor, the buddy, if they also have severe mental illnesses, it creates an environment where people feel like, oh, such people with mental illnesses are thriving, so I can thrive too, right? And invest in training, because that's really important, because it's such a sensitive piece. So let's talk about inclusion in action. TCS has a 24/7 confidential counseling available to all employees and their families. Infosys has a mindful manager program. Shell also, we have ambassadors, we care ambassadors. Accenture has mental health allies. But I think one thing to bear in mind in all of these is these are generic mental health sort of extensions. What we need to think about is how do we then extend it to people with severe mental illnesses. So there is one step more to go here. So I just wanted to kind of talk about what the mindspace circles look like. So just in terms of what organizations can embed, and I also work in I'm a chief mentor for an organization called Vision Sync, and we work extensively on employee resource groups for global capability centers. And there is a three pronged approach. We need to kind of think about whether this is included in policy. We need to make sure this is then embedded in practice, and then we need to make sure this also goes into performance. So when we do leadership accelerate, we need to have psychological safety and AI fluency programs for leaders. So why AI? Because AI helps, sort of at least filter out biases in communications and things like that. We also sort of lead with sort of with the ERGs, employee resource groups. It's important to lead with peer circles. So peer circles bring emotional intelligence, vulnerability, and compassionate leadership. So if you have peer circles, like we said, allies who also are going through severe mental illnesses or have families going through severe mental illnesses, it's a great way to bring them together to talk about how all of them are dealing with workplace dilemmas in the specific context. Vijay is already doing that brilliantly in his community. AI inclusion dashboards should also include real-time sentiment monitoring. This is fabulous. Bias detection and predictive analytics to track inclusion effectiveness. And the best thing is then it's not restricted to women or a particular group. It also extends to for people with severe mental illnesses. The peer ally networks is something that I wanted to kind of talk about in a bit more detail, because every employee is individually experiencing mental health challenges. An ally is a trained peer who provides confidential listening, resources, and empathy. So it may not be a line manager alone, because line managers cannot be expected to do everything. So can the line manager refer this employee to an ally, provided the employee is okay with it? A small support group where employees share experiences. There could be employees with severe mental illnesses and allies who can support them and know these policies, including HR. Community, a broader ERG network coordinating events, education, and advocacy. Employee resource groups are powerful in culture embed, and what we have seen from our own experience of helping organizations put employee resource groups together is that you can then create a program for a full year, a calendar of activities that includes plenaries where you have awareness of what's happening, what can be done, and then these peer circles that can then support people who truly need that sort of support. So from the macro to the micro for the organization, and most GCCs are around the 3,000, 4,000 employee mark. ITITS has anywhere between 25,000 to a lakh and a half. So we do need to be able to make aware to all employees, and we need to draw those circles out for people in dire need. Culture, organization-wide shift where mental health conversations become normalized. This is already there from a mental health space, but I think we need to go into the severe mental illness space as well. So how do we build, and this is my last slide, and I'll stop. How do we build end-to-end systems? So there's a recruitment piece, there is an onboarding piece, there's an accommodation piece, there's performance management, crisis response, and reintegration, right? So recruitment, we just talked about it. Talent acquisition needs to be bias-free, inclusive interview process, voluntary disclosure protocols. Onboarding needs to be accommodation conversations. What do you need? Buddy system activation, with people with similar, sort of scenarios. Resource orientation. What accommodation is needed? HR and manager needs to have that conversation, do a needs assessment, have an implementation plan, have regular effectiveness reviews. Now this can happen when the employee is onboarded or after, when we discover that the employee needs support. Performance management, we still want to be fair. So fair evaluation standards, we shouldn't drop the standards. Separation of health from performance and career development support. We provide reasonable accommodation, but expect the right delivery and have those tight conversations. That's pretty critical. And then crisis response. So what happens if there is an episode? There should be safety protocols, professional intervention, and confidential documentation. I've had a case scenario when I had a psychosis in the office. And my managers were very understanding. HR got involved. They called my husband. So the emergency response is very important, and then the family needs to take over, and there needs to be a safe transfer of person from the office environment to the caregiver. So that's the crisis response protocol you need to have, irrespective of whether you have a severe mental illness. Disclosure, because there would be people with emergency mental illness, episodic psychotic breaks that could happen, and you need to have this crisis response irrespective. Finally, reintegration. I bounced back, and I bounced back pretty quickly in a week or so. So then how do you sort of help this employee reintegrate? In my case, I was actually, in the first time, because I didn't know what is happening, was offered a fully virtual global role. So gradual return plan, modified workload, check-in schedule, all of this sort of helps the employee thrive, and also, the organization benefits from this. And with that, we're always here to help corporates who wants to design, interventions and systems for their employees with severe mental illnesses. Thank you.